Many of us have already been feeling the pinch as the cost of living quickly morphs into a crisis. Gas and oil prices have skyrocketed, and we can all expect further energy price hikes later this year. Is it time to buckle up and prepare for the worst? Since the start of 2022, we've been exploring ways that we can all beat the big squeeze. But now, as inflation continues to soar and the increasing cost of living hits households across the country, some experts are predicting another recession. Since April, there was a 54% jump in gas and electricity, and the Bank of England believes that costs will rise further in October by as much as 40%. This will take the average domestic bill to more than £2,800 a year. Meanwhile, interest rates are set to hit levels not seen in more than 30 years. With rampant inflation and the snowballing cost of living set to leave households and businesses feeling poorer, spending is likely to fall. As a result, the economy will contract. If forecasters are correct, this is how we might expect a recession to manifest in the near future. Welcome to Savvy Economists. Today in this video we are going to be discussing the global recession and how an imploding market would be leading us to an unprecedented crash like never seen before. Before we get into the video, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. Also make sure to hit the like button and turn on notifications.
My demographic analysis, the greatest boom in history. When I was predicting this in the 80s, people thought I was crazy. That the U.S. could do so well. They thought Japan and Asia was going to take over the world. I said, no, that we still have a giant, one of the best baby booms in history coming along, and they're going to spend and earn a lot of money, and we're going to have the greatest boom in history from 1983 to 2007. And then 2008, of course, it did go down. And I predicted that 20-some years before it happened, okay? But forget that. That caused a shock to the economy. And then governments have been printing money ever since. Now to print money for a year to overcome a strong downturn like 2008-9, I'd agree with that. 1 year of money printing. To be printing money 13, 14 years and escalating and printing and fiscal stimulus combined after COVID for 2 years, $10 trillion, half of GDP, is insanity. How crazy things have gotten. Governments we should have had, my forecast all the way back to the 80s when I started with my generation cycles and technology cycles every 45 years, the generation are more like 38, 39. And we'd have the greatest boom in history, but it would slow after 2007 and not come back with the millennials until about 2023, 24. Well, what we have now is we have the greatest bubble in history because governments fought the slowdown after 2008, which was very serious and would have been more serious and should have lasted into 2010, much like the 29 to 32 collapse. They just bubbled up financial assets. They haven't changed, incomes and stuff. They bubbled up financial assets, which means the rich, which were already getting richer in the greatest bubble boom in history, got even richer, and everyday people are still struggling. And now we have an economy, and I've been warning for years, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's happening now. You can't do this forever. You can't just print money and grow an economy past its fundamentals of what I study better than I think anybody in the world. When do people earn and spend money over their life cycle? What's the life cycle of people, and how do generations, particularly the largest in history, at least the largest in 250 years, the baby boom generation, affect that boom and bust? And we are still in the bust wake of the baby boom's peak into 2023, 24 before we can grow through natural causes. And I see that this government printing scheme is now failing, despite printing more and more, failing anyway, because you can't do this forever, and it's going to collapse, which is just in time for us to balance out the economy so we can grow again with the millennial generation from 2024 forward. So I'm happy to see this collapse. I'm happy to see a downturn, damn it. We should have had a bigger one in 2008, 9, and 10 and got rid of most of this bad debt. Now we have more bad debt than ever. We're going to get rid of it in the next few years. It's going to be painful.
Irrespective of the negative impact of the global recession and market crash, Dent framed an economic slump as a positive and desirable development, arguing the economy needs to cool down, bad debts have to be restructured, and the worst companies must be weeded out. Dent also framed a market crash as a chance for young people to invest at reasonable prices, earn solid returns, and save for retirement. Meanwhile, in another scenario, Richard Thaler says nothing in the U.S. economy resembles a recession. Richard Thaler ridiculed the idea that the U.S. economy is in a recession, downplayed the inflation threat, and championed higher wages for blue-collar workers in a CNBC interview this week. Thaler, the author of Nudge and the winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017, underscored the disconnect between claims of a U.S. recession based on 2 consecutive quarters of declining output this year and economic reality. "I don't see anything that resembles a recession," he told CNBC. "We have record low unemployment, record high vacancies. That looks like a strong economy." Thaler noted the U.S. economy grew less quickly than prices rose, meaning real gross domestic product, GDP, shrunk slightly this year. Thaler also asserted that given the widening U.S. income gap in recent decades, it could be beneficial for lower-paid workers to earn higher wages, despite the risk of their employers hiking prices to offset their higher costs, fueling inflation. "Everywhere I go, you see signs of a shortage of labor, and supply and demand says wages should go up," he said, pointing to the ubiquitous help-wanted signs in the windows of many U.S. restaurants. "So wages are going to go up, and I think that's good." As to whether his claims of a strong economy rather than a crashing is valid is left to time as everything unfolds in the coming months. Inflation could remain stubbornly high if labor markets remain overly tight or inflation expectations are too optimistic and prove more costly than expected. And renewed COVID-19 outbreaks and lockdowns threaten to further suppress China's growth. In a plausible alternative scenario where some of these risks materialize, inflation will rise and global growth decelerate further to about 2.6% this year and 2% next year, a pace that growth has fallen below just 5 times since 1970. Under this scenario, both the United States and the Euro area experience near zero growth next year, with negative knock-on effects for the rest of the world. Inflation at current levels represents a clear risk for current and future macroeconomic stability, and bringing it back to central bank targets should be the top priority for policymakers. In response to incoming data, central banks of major advanced economies are withdrawing monetary support faster than we expected in April, while many in emerging market and developing economies had already started raising interest rates last year. The resulting synchronized monetary tightening across countries is historically unprecedented, and its effects are expected to bite, with global growth slowing next year and inflation decelerating. Tighter monetary policy will inevitably have real economic costs, but delaying it will only exacerbate the hardship. Central banks that have started tightening should stay the course until inflation is tamed. Targeted fiscal support can help cushion the impact on the most vulnerable. But with government budgets stretched by the pandemic and the need for an overall disinflationary macroeconomic policy stance, offsetting targeted support with higher taxes or lower government spending will ensure that fiscal policy does not make the job of monetary policy even harder. As advanced economies raise interest rates to fight inflation, financial conditions are tightening, especially for their emerging market counterparts. Countries must appropriately use macroprudential tools to safeguard financial stability. Where flexible exchange rates are insufficient to absorb external shocks, policymakers will need to be ready to implement foreign exchange interventions or capital flow management measures in a crisis scenario. Such challenges come at a time when many countries lack fiscal space, with the share of low-income countries in or at high risk of debt distress at 60%, up from about 20% a decade ago. Higher borrowing costs, diminished credit flows, a stronger dollar, and weaker growth will push even more into distress. The simultaneous materialization of all scenarios presented above could reduce global growth to only 2.1% in 2022 and 1.5% in 2023, 0.8 and 1.5 percentage points slower than in the baseline forecast. This would correspond to a sharp global downturn and effectively push the global economy to the brink of recession. The prospects of a dire global economic outcome, so soon after the pandemic global recession, could have devastating consequences for the world's poor. Even if several downside risks materialize, policymakers may be able to fend off the worst economic outcomes. At a national level, a forceful policy response would require an urgent reprioritization of spending toward targeted relief for vulnerable households, steadfast commitment to credible monetary frameworks, and a general restraint in the use of distortionary policies such as export restrictions and price controls. Once the global economy has stabilized, reversing the damage inflicted by the dual shocks of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine will require an unwavering commitment to growth-enhancing policies, including large-scale investment in education and digital technologies, and the promotion of labor force participation, especially female participation, through active labor market policies. With the pandemic continuing to maintain its grip, the IMF believes the need for an effective global health strategy is more evident than ever. Worldwide access to vaccines, tests, and treatments is essential to reduce the risk of further variants. This requires increased production of supplies, better in-country delivery systems, and fairer international distribution. We are sadly still in the early stages of the crash, and no one knows to what degree the economic disaster would be. By listening to news from channels like the Savvy Economist, you'd be kept up to date about economic fluctuations and emerging news as they happen. Let us know the measures you are taking to prepare for this crash in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also turn on your notifications. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.